You're sitting at a table with people your own age. Everyone's laughing about something, some trend, some meme, some drama that apparently everyone is supposed to care about. And you're smiling. You're nodding. You're doing the thing you always do, which is performing participation while your brain is somewhere else entirely. Because the truth is, you don't feel like these people. You never have. Not because you think you're better than them, not because you're trying to be different, but because something about the way you experience the world has always felt heavier, slower, more serious than it's supposed to at your age. When you were 10, you thought like a teenager. When you were a teenager, people told you that you had an old soul. When you hit your 20s, you felt like you'd already lived a lifetime that nobody around you could see. And now, wherever you are, you look at people your age and feel like you're watching them through glass, close enough to see, too far away to touch. You don't fit the timeline. You never did. And the loneliest part isn't that you feel older. It's that nobody has ever been able to explain why. Until now. Because psychology has a lot to say about people like you, and almost none of it is what you've been told. Let's start with the thing that's probably been true about you for as long as you can remember. You were the child who understood too much. You picked up on tension between your parents before anyone said a word. You noticed when a teacher was having a bad day. You felt the weight of adult problems that were never yours to carry, but somehow ended up in your lap anyway. And instead of someone saying, "You shouldn't have to deal with this," the adults in your life said, "You're so mature," like it was a gift, like it was something to be proud of. But it wasn't maturity. It was survival. And those are two very different things. Psychologists have a term for this. It's called parentification. It happens when a child is placed into an emotional or functional role that belongs to an adult. Sometimes it's obvious. A kid raising younger siblings, managing a household, mediating between fighting parents. Sometimes it's invisible. A child who learns to monitor the emotional climate of a room, who becomes the steady one, the responsible one, the one who never causes problems because they've figured out that their problems aren't the ones that get attention. Either way, the result is the same. The child ages ahead of schedule, not because they wanted to, because they had to. And the cruelest part is that everyone praised you for it. She's so independent. He never complains. She's like a little adult. Every one of those compliments was actually a description of a child who had stopped asking for help because they figured out it wasn't coming. You weren't independent. You were unsupported. You weren't mature. You were adapted. And the difference between maturity and adaptation is that maturity is a process you grow into naturally. Adaptation is a response to an environment that demanded too much too soon. One is development, the other is defense. And you were defending yourself before you had the vocabulary to explain what you were defending against. And here's the part nobody explains. When a child adapts by becoming emotionally older, they don't just feel older temporarily. They reorganize their entire nervous system around the expectation that the world is heavy and they need to be ready. Research on early childhood stress has shown that children who take on adult emotional roles develop heightened cortisol responses, increased vigilance, and a deeper sensitivity to environmental cues. In plain language, your body learned to stay alert because relaxing wasn't safe. And that alertness didn't go away when you grew up. It just became your personality. The part of you that's always scanning, always preparing, always 3 steps ahead of a problem that hasn't happened yet. That's not wisdom. That's a nervous system that was trained too early. But here's where it gets complicated, because not everyone who feels older than their age had a difficult childhood. Some of you grew up in perfectly stable homes with loving parents and still felt like you were on a different frequency than everyone around you. You weren't parentified. You weren't traumatized. You were just built differently. And that leads to the second psychological explanation, which is temperament. There's a trait that psychologist Elaine Aron has studied extensively called sensory processing sensitivity. About 15 to 20% of the population has it. It means your nervous system processes stimuli more deeply than average: sounds, emotions, social dynamics, even abstract ideas. Highly sensitive people don't just experience the world, they metabolize it. Every interaction, every observation, every small emotional shift in a room gets processed at a depth that most people never reach. And that depth creates a feeling of being older, because depth feels like weight, and weight feels like years. If you've ever watched your friends breeze through a situation that took you days to emotionally process, that's not because something is wrong with you. It's because your brain took in more information than theirs did. You weren't overreacting, you were fully reacting. They were underreacting. But because they're the majority, their reaction gets to be normal, and yours gets to be too much. And this trait doesn't just affect how you process emotions, it affects how you process culture, meaning, and experience itself. A movie isn't just entertainment, you're thinking about the themes for days. A song isn't just a song, it unlocks something in you that you carry around for weeks. A conversation with a stranger at a coffee shop can shift your entire perspective on something you thought you'd figured out years ago. You live at a higher resolution than most people, and that resolution makes you feel like you've been alive longer, because in a very real sense, you've experienced more per year than most people do. Same number of days, 10 times the processing. This is where the loneliness comes from. The feeling of being older than your age is really the feeling of being deeper than your surroundings. You walk through life noticing things that other people don't register. You think about things that other people skip over. You feel things that other people let pass without a second thought. And because there's no one reflecting that depth back to you, you start to wonder if you're the one who's wrong. Maybe you should care about the things everyone else cares about. Maybe you should be lighter. Maybe you should stop thinking so much and just enjoy things the way normal people do. You've probably tried. That's the part that stings. You've probably tried to be lighter, tried to care less, tried to just enjoy the party without analyzing the dynamics, tried to watch the show without thinking about what it means. And it didn't work. Not because you didn't try hard enough, but because you can't downgrade your own operating system. You can't unsee what you see. You can't unfeel what you feel. And every time you try to pretend you're simpler than you are, you end up feeling more isolated than if you just stayed quiet in the first place. But that's not how your brain works. And pretending it is doesn't make you feel better. It just makes you feel more alone. Let's go deeper into this, because there's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes with feeling older than your age, and it doesn't have a name, but it should. It's the exhaustion of translation. You spend your entire life translating yourself into a version that other people can understand. You simplify your thoughts so they don't overwhelm a conversation. You hold back your real opinions because you've learned that most people don't want depth, they want agreement. You perform lightness because heaviness makes people uncomfortable. And over time, that translation costs you something. It costs you the experience of being fully known. Because the version of you that the world sees is the translated version, the edited version, the one that fits. And the real version, the one that thinks too much, feels too deeply, and carries the quiet weight of seeing the world as it actually is, that version stays hidden. Not because you're ashamed of it, but because you've never met a room that could hold it. There's another dimension to this that psychology is only recently starting to explore, and it has to do with your relationship with time itself. People who feel older than their age often have a different temporal orientation than their peers. Most people your age are present-oriented. They live in the moment. They respond to what's in front of them. They don't spend a lot of time thinking about the arc of their life. You're different. You think in arcs. You think about where things are going, what things mean. In the long run, how today connects to 5 years from now. You don't just experience events, you place them in a timeline. And that timeline awareness makes everything feel more significant, more weighted, more serious than it feels to someone who's just living day to day. This isn't pessimism, this is a cognitive style. Researchers call it future-oriented temporal perspective, and it's associated with higher levels of conscientiousness, better long-term planning, and stronger impulse control. But it's also associated with a persistent sense of heaviness, because when you're always aware of the bigger picture, nothing ever feels small. A conversation isn't just a conversation, it's a data point in a relationship. A decision isn't just a decision, it's a fork in a path that leads somewhere. You can't turn this off, and the people around you who can just go with the flow and see what happens, they don't realize how much mental architecture you're building in the background just to exist. This temporal awareness also explains why milestones hit you differently. Birthdays feel heavier for you than they do for your friends. New Year's Eve isn't a party, it's an audit. You don't celebrate the passage of time, you feel it. Every year that passes carries weight, because you're not just counting time, you're measuring it against meaning. What have I built? Where am I going? Am I where I should be? These aren't questions that 25-year-olds are supposed to be asking with this kind of urgency, but you've been asking them since you were 15, and nobody around you seemed to understand why a birthday could make you cry. Not from sadness, but from the sheer pressure of being aware that time is moving and you can feel every second of it. Here's something else that might finally explain a pattern you've noticed. People who feel older than their age tend to attract older friends and partners. Not always by a lot, sometimes just a few years, but enough to notice. And the reason is simple. Older people match your frequency. They've lived through enough to speak your language. They don't need you to translate. When you're 22 and your closest friend is 30, it's not because something went wrong with your social development. It's because you found someone who operates at the same depth you do, and age had nothing to do with it. Depth did. And this works in reverse too. You probably struggle to connect with people your own age who haven't been through much. Not because you judge them, but because the things they care about feel distant to you. The small dramas, the surface-level goals, the casual approach to relationships and time, none of it resonates. And you sit there wondering why you can't just relax into it the way everyone else does, why everything has to mean something, why you can't just let things be light. You've probably been called intense for this, or serious, or someone has told you to stop being so deep, as if depth is a faucet you can turn off. And every time someone says that, it widens the gap a little more. Because what they're really saying is, I can't meet you where you are. And what you hear is, you're too much for this world. But you're not too much. You're just in rooms that are too small for you. And the tragedy is that you keep shrinking yourself to fit, when what you actually need is a bigger room. It's because your brain won't let you, and that's not a flaw, that's architecture. Let me talk about something that almost never gets addressed in videos like this. The grief. Not grief for a person, grief for the version of yourself that never got to be young. You watch people your age making impulsive decisions, having fun without overthinking it, living without the weight of constant awareness, and part of you aches. Not because you want to be reckless, but because you never got the option. You were already carrying something by the time you were old enough to remember. Whether it was a difficult home, a sensitive nervous system, or just a brain that wouldn't stop processing, you skipped something. And you can feel the gap even if you can't name it. That grief is real, and it's valid. And it doesn't mean you're stuck. It means you're human enough to notice what you missed. Most people don't even get that far. And here's what makes it even more complicated. You can't go back and get it. You can't unknow the things you know. You can't unfeel the depth you feel. You can't suddenly become the 20-something who doesn't think about mortality at brunch. That door closed a long time ago. Maybe it was never open. And accepting that isn't giving up. It's growing into the person you were always going to become. The person who trades lightness for meaning. The person who would rather feel everything deeply than float through life feeling nothing at all. You didn't choose this, but now that you're here, you might as well stop pretending you're someone else. Here's what I need you to understand about yourself. The heaviness you carry is not a burden. It's a lens. You see the world with a clarity that most people spend decades trying to develop, if they ever develop it at all. The depth that makes you feel out of place at a party is the same depth that makes you irreplaceable in a crisis. The seriousness that makes small talk feel pointless is the same seriousness that makes your relationships meaningful. The awareness that makes you feel older is the same awareness that makes you wise beyond any number that a birthday can measure. You were never behind. You were never broken. You were never too serious or too intense or too old for your age. You were just operating on a system that the world doesn't have a setting for. And instead of recognizing that, the world told you to lighten up, to relax, to act your age, as if your age had anything to do with the depth of your experience. It doesn't. It never did. So the next time someone tells you to lighten up, remember what you now know. Your nervous system is calibrated for depth. Your brain processes the world at a resolution most people never access. Your awareness isn't a weight, it's a skill. And the years you feel that don't match the number on your ID aren't imaginary. They're the accumulated cost of living with your eyes open in a world that keeps telling everyone to close theirs. You're not older than your age. You're just more awake than most people are willing to be. And that's not something to fix. That's something to honor. If this felt like someone finally understood what you've been carrying, subscribe. This channel was built for people like you. The ones who were never quite young enough. The ones who noticed too much too early. The ones who have been waiting their entire lives for someone to say, "You're not too much. The world is just not deep enough for what you bring to it." You were never too old for your age. Everyone else was just too young for yours.